Ethan Carter had always been the kind of man who preferred the quiet life. He wasn't the type to chase adventure or look for trouble. In fact, he liked things simple, digging in the dirt, uncovering pieces of history, and spending his evenings reading old books by the light of a dim lamp. His job as an archaeologist suited him well. It gave him purpose without demanding too much excitement. But all of that changed on a cold, gray morning in November. The dig site was located just outside a small town in Ohio, where rolling fields stretched endlessly under a pale sky. Ethan had been working there for weeks, searching for artifacts from early Native American settlements. The work was slow, tedious, and often frustrating, but it paid the bills. That day, however, something unusual caught his eye, a faint glimmer beneath the soil. At first, he thought it might be nothing more than a shard of glass or a piece of metal left behind by modern farmers. But when he brushed away the dirt with his gloved hands, he realized it was something far stranger. The object was round, about the size of a dinner plate, and made of a material he couldn't identify. It shimmered faintly, even in the dull light, and its surface was covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shift and move when he looked at them too long. Ethan frowned, leaning closer to examine it. He'd seen carvings like these before, ancient texts and ruins, but never anything quite like this. The craftsmanship was flawless, almost otherworldly. As he ran his fingers over the smooth surface, a strange warmth spread through his hand, followed by a sharp, tingling sensation. Before he could pull away, the artifact let out a low hum, vibrating softly against his palm. Then, without warning, it cracked. A jagged line split across its center, glowing brightly for a brief moment before the entire thing shattered into countless fragments. A wave of energy surged outward, knocking Ethan off his feet. The world around him blurred, colors swirling together like paint on water. For a few seconds, he felt weightless, as though he were floating in some vast, endless void. And then everything went black. When Ethan came to, he was lying on the ground, staring up at the cloudy sky. His head throbbed painfully, and his body felt different. He couldn't quite explain it, but there was a new awareness humming beneath. His skin, like static electricity coursing through his veins. Slowly, he sat up, brushing dirt from his clothes. The dig site was eerily silent, the usual chatter of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an unnatural stillness. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with an invisible tension. What just happened? He muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. His voice sounded distant, muffled, as though someone had stuffed cotton in his ears. Shaking his head, he glanced down at the spot where the artifact had been. All that remained were tiny shards scattered across the earth, glittering faintly in the weak sunlight. They looked harmless now, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't. Something about them felt alive. He reached out tentatively, picking up one of the fragments. It was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been given the chilly weather. As he held it, flashes of images flickered in his mind, strange landscapes, filled with towering structures, battles fought among stars, and faces he didn't recognize, but somehow knew. The visions were overwhelming, and he dropped the shard with a gasp. His heart pounded wildly in his chest as he tried to make sense of what he'd just experienced. "Ethan, are you okay?" The sound of another voice startled him. Turning quickly, he saw Rachel Dawson standing a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest and a concerned expression on her face. Rachel had known Ethan since childhood, and though their paths had diverged over the years, she still considered him family. When she heard he'd taken on this project, she decided to visit, hoping to catch up. She hadn't expected to find him sprawled on the ground, looking dazed. "I'm fine," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "Just tripped, I guess." Rachel raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Tripped? You don't usually fall flat on your back while digging. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened. How could he tell her about the artifact? the explosion of energy, and the bizarre visions, without sounding crazy. Instead, he shrugged, trying to play it off. It's nothing really, just tired, I think. Rachel studied him for a moment, longer before sighing. All right, but if you're hiding something, you know you can talk to me, right? I know, Ethan replied, giving her a grateful nod. Thanks, Ratch, as they packed up their tools and headed back to Ethan's truck. He couldn't stop thinking about the artifact, or, rather, what was left of it. Whatever it was, it had done something to him. He could feel it deep inside, like a second heartbeat, pulsing steadily in the background. Over the next few days, those feelings only grew stronger. Simple tasks became easier. He noticed details he'd never paid attention to before, like the faint scent of rain hours before a storm, or the subtle changes in people's expressions when they lied. Most unsettling of all, he discovered he could move faster and lift heavier objects than ever before, as though his body had been upgraded overnight. At first, Ethan tried to ignore these changes, convincing himself they were just side effects of stress or lack of sleep. But when he accidentally shattered a coffee mug by gripping it too tightly one morning, he knew he couldn't deny it any longer. Something was happening to him, and it scared him. Rachel noticed the change too. You've been acting weird lately, she said during one of their late-night conversations. They were sitting in Ethan's living room, surrounded by stacks of books and half-empty cups of tea. Is everything all right? Ethan hesitated, torn between keeping his secret and confiding in his oldest friend. Finally, he sighed. I don't know, Ratch. Ever since that day at the dig site, I've been different. Different how? Rachel asked, leaning forward. Ethan hesitated again, then decided to show her. He picked up a heavy ceramic vase from the table and crushed it effortlessly in his hand. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. What the hell, Ethan? I told you, he said grimly. Something's wrong with me. Rachel stared at him, her mind racing. After a moment, she shook her head. Wrong, maybe, but maybe not. Whatever this is, we need to figure it out, and fast. Because if anyone else finds out, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan already knew what she meant. If word got out about his newfound abilities, it wouldn't take long for others to come looking. And judging by the uneasy feeling growing in his gut, whoever showed up wouldn't have good intentions. Over the next week, Ethan and Rachel did their best to keep a low profile. They avoided crowded places, stuck to quiet roads, and kept the blinds drawn at night. Despite their precautions, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, cars lingered suspiciously near his house, and strange phone calls interrupted his evenings. Each incident left him more anxious than the last. Then, one night, it happened. Ethan was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when he heard a soft click downstairs. At first, he thought it was Rachel, who had stayed over to help him sort through some research materials. But when he called out her name, there was no response. Heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the stairs. The living room was dark, but he could see faint outlines of figures moving near the window. There were 3 of them, dressed in black, and armed with devices that looked like futuristic weapons. One of them turned slightly, revealing a patch on his jacket, a stylized eye surrounded by a circle. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. Whoever these people were, they weren't here for a friendly chat. Suddenly, the intruders spotted him. Without hesitation, they raised their weapons and fired. Bright beams of light shot through the air, narrowly missing Ethan as he dove for cover. Adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his senses and heightening his reflexes. Before he even realized what he was doing, he leaped to his feet and hurled the nearest piece of furniture, heavy wooden chair, at the closest attacker. The man went down with a grunt, dropping his weapon. The other 2 hesitated, clearly surprised by Ethan's strength and speed. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her toward the back door. Run, he shouted, shoving her outside, just as another beam of light grazed his shoulder. Pain flared briefly, but it faded almost instantly, replaced by a surge of raw energy that coursed through his veins. They sprinted into the woods behind the house, weaving between trees and ducking under branches. Behind them, the intruders gave chase, shouting orders into radios. Ethan pushed harder, his muscles burning with effort but refusing to give out. For the first time, he fully embraced the power inside him, letting it guide his movements and fuel his determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing where Rachel's car was parked. She jumped into the driver's seat while Ethan slid into the passenger side, slamming the door shut just as the pursuers emerged from the trees. The engine roared to life, and Rachel floored the accelerator, sending gravel flying as they sped away. Neither of them spoke as they drove, adrenaline still pumping through their veins. It wasn't until they were miles away, safely hidden in a roadside motel, that Ethan finally broke the silence. "This isn't over," he said quietly, staring out the window at the dark horizon. "Not even close." Grace Miller had always been drawn to stories that others overlooked. As a journalist, she prided herself on digging deeper, asking tougher questions, and uncovering truths hidden beneath layers of misinformation. Her latest lead, however, was unlike anything she'd encountered before. It started with an anonymous envelope slipped under her apartment door one rainy evening, a bundle of documents filled with cryptic notes, grainy photographs, and references to something called the seal. At first glance, the materials seemed like the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist, but Grace wasn't so quick to dismiss them. She recognized certain phrases and symbols from old myths and legends she'd studied during her college years. The seal, according to the documents, was tied to humanity's untapped potential powers, buried deep within every person, waiting for the right moment to awaken. According to the notes, someone had recently broken this seal, triggering a chain reaction that could change everything. Intrigued but cautious, Grace began piecing together the puzzle. She spent hours combing through libraries, online archives, and obscure forums where amateur historians shared their findings. Slowly, a pattern emerged. References to the seal appeared in ancient texts from nearly every culture: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Norse runes, Mayan carvings, all hinting at a time when humans were more than mere mortals. They spoke of gods walking among men, of wars fought across stars, and of a decision made by an advanced alien race to suppress humanity's true nature. The more Grace read, the more convinced she became that these weren't just myths. Something real was happening, and it was connected to the recent events described in the documents. People around the world were reporting strange phenomena and explained bursts of strength, heightened senses, even telekinetic abilities. Most dismissed these claims as hoaxes or hysteria, but Grace knew better. There was a thread connecting all of it, and she intended to follow it wherever it led. Her investigation took her to Chicago, where she met with a retired astrophysicist named Dr. Alan Peters. He was an eccentric man in his late 60s, with wild gray hair and a penchant for wearing mismatched socks. Despite his quirky appearance, he was widely respected in academic circles, known for his groundbreaking work on extraterrestrial life. When Grace showed him the documents, his eyes lit up with excitement. "You're onto something big," he said, flipping through the pages. "These symbols, they match artifacts I've seen in classified government files. Supposedly, they belong to a species called the Avians." "The Avians?" Grace asked, jotting down the name. "They're believed to be an ancient, highly advanced civilization," Dr. Peters explained. "From what little we know, they visited Earth thousands of years ago. Some say they helped shape human evolution, while others claim they feared what we might become if left unchecked. That's why they created the seal, to lock away our latent abilities." Grace frowned. "And now someone has broken it." Dr. Peters nodded gravely. "If that's true, then humanity is about to enter uncharted territory. Awakening powers like these, it could unite us or tear us apart. The conversation left Grace with more questions than answers, but it also gave her a clearer direction. She needed to find whoever had shattered the seal, whoever they were. They held the key to understanding what was happening, and perhaps stopping it before things spiraled out of control. Meanwhile, Ethan and Rachel had managed to stay one step ahead of their pursuers, but only barely. After fleeing their hometown, they drove aimlessly for days, sleeping in cheap motels and eating meals from roadside diners. Ethan tried to keep a low profile, but his growing powers made that increasingly difficult. Simple actions like opening a jar or lifting a suitcase often resulted in broken objects and startled stares. Even worse, he couldn't control the vivid dreams that plagued him each night. In them, he saw flashes of battles fought among stars, heard voices speaking languages he didn't understand, and felt emotions so intense they left him breathless. Upon waking, Rachel did her best to help, though she admitted she was out of her depth. "I'm not exactly equipped to deal with whatever this is," she confessed one evening as they sat in yet another motel room. "But I'm here for you, Ethan. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." Ethan appreciated her loyalty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was putting her in danger. Every time they stopped somewhere new, he noticed cars lingering too long, or strangers watching them from afar. Whoever was after him wasn't giving up, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time until they caught up. One afternoon, while refueling their car at a gas station in Indiana, Ethan spotted a familiar face. It was Grace Miller, standing near the entrance of a small cafe across the street. She was talking animatedly on her phone, occasionally glancing around, as if searching for something or someone. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could she be connected to the people chasing him? Or was she just another innocent bystander caught in the chaos? Before he could decide, Grace suddenly turned and locked eyes with him. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then, without thinking, Ethan ducked behind the car, his pulse racing. "What is it?" Rachel asked, noticing his sudden tension. "I think someone's following us," Ethan whispered, peeking over the hood. Grace was still standing there, her expression unreadable. "We can't keep running forever," Rachel said firmly. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding and start fighting back." Ethan hesitated. He wanted to believe Rachel was right, but the thought of confronting anyone terrified him. What if they were armed? What if they hurt Rachel? Before he could respond, Grace crossed the street and approached them cautiously, holding up her hands. "To show she meant no harm, Ethan Carter?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. "I need to talk to you." "How do you know my name?" Ethan demanded, stepping protectively in front of Rachel. Grace glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Because I know what happened to you. I know about the Sealand. I think I can help." For a moment, Ethan considered telling her to leave, to mind her own business. But something in her tone, a mix of desperation and sincerity, made him pause. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "All right, but if this is some kind of trap—" "It's not," Grace interrupted quickly. "Look, I don't have much time to explain, but we're on the same side. Those people chasing you, they're part of a secret organization called the Veil. Their leader, Victor Kane, wants to control what's happening to use awakened humans like pawns in his game. If we don't stop him, things are going to get a lot worse." Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Rachel, who shrugged. "She doesn't seem crazy," Rachel muttered. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed to hear Grace out. Over coffee in the cafe, she recounted everything she'd learned about the seal, the avians, and the Veil. By the time she finished, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because he finally understood what was happening to him, and dread because the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. "So, what do we do now?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Grace leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "We fight back, together." Over the next few days, the trio worked to piece together a plan. Grace used her contacts in journalism to gather intel on the Veil, while Ethan practiced controlling his powers in secluded areas. Rachel, meanwhile, handled logistics, ensuring they stayed fed, rested, and one step ahead of their pursuers. It wasn't easy. Tensions ran high, and disagreements often erupted, but they were united by a common goal: to expose the truth and protect those affected by the Seal's awakening. Their first real test came sooner than expected. While staying at a cabin deep in the woods, they detected signs of surveillance drones flying overhead, tire tracks leading toward their location, and faint radio chatter crackling in the distance. Realizing they'd been found, Ethan suggested splitting up to confuse their trackers. Grace reluctantly agreed, promising to meet them at a designated safe house if things went south. As night fell, the sound of engines roared through the forest. Armed agents clad in black tactical gear surrounded the cabin, shouting orders into megaphones. Inside, Ethan braced himself, his body buzzing with energy. He wasn't sure how far his powers extended, but he was about to find out. When the agents breached the door, Ethan unleashed a shockwave of force, sending furniture flying and knocking several attackers off their feet. Outside, Rachel fired warning shots into the air, buying them precious seconds to escape. Together, they bolted into the woods, dodging bullets and leaping over fallen logs as shouts echoed behind them. Grace, meanwhile, had positioned herself strategically along the route. Using flares and decoy devices, she created diversions that slowed the agents down, allowing Ethan and Rachel to reach the safe house undetected. When they finally reunited hours later, exhausted but alive, they knew they'd accomplished something monumental. For the first time, they'd stood their ground, and won. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan stared out the window, lost in thought. He didn't choose this path, but now it was his responsibility to see it through, no matter the. Ethan, Grace, and Rachel spent the next few days holed up in the safe house, a small cabin tucked away in the mountains of Colorado. It was remote, quiet, and far from prying Isa, perfect place to regroup and plan their next steps. But despite the temporary safety, none of them could relax completely. The events at the previous hideout had left them shaken, and the constant threat of the Veil loomed over them like a storm cloud. Grace pored over maps, documents, and notes, trying to piece together a clearer picture of the Veil's operations. She knew they needed more allies if they hoped to stand a chance against Victor Kane and his organization. "We can't keep running," she said one evening, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "Sooner or later, they'll catch us. We need help." Ethan nodded, though the weight of her words made his chest tighten. He still struggled to accept the idea of involving others, not because he didn't trust people, but because he feared putting them in danger. Every time someone got close to him, bad things happened. First Rachel, now Grace. How many more lives would he risk before this was over? Rachel, ever the voice of reason, chimed in. "She's right, Ethan. You saw what happened back there. We barely made it out alive. If we want to fight back, we need numbers and skills we don't have." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, where do we even start?" Grace pulled out a folder filled with photographs and profiles. "I've been doing some digging. There are others like you people who've awakened to their powers. Some are keeping it hidden, afraid of what might happen if anyone finds out. Others, well, let's just say not everyone is handling it well." She slid a photo across the table. It showed a young man standing near a demolished car, his arms raised as if mid-motion. The caption beneath read, *Ryan Fletcher, former Army Ranger. This guy is ex-military. Reports say he saved an entire neighborhood during a fire by lifting debris no human should be able to move. Afterward, he disappeared. I think he's part of a resistance group operating underground." "A resistance?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. You mean there are already groups fighting back? Grace nodded. Small ones, scattered across the country. They call themselves the Awakened. From what I've gathered, they're trying to protect people with powers from being captured or worse by organizations like the Veil. Rachel leaned forward, intrigued. Do you know how to find them? Grace hesitated. Not exactly, but I have a lead. There's a contact in New Mexico who might be able to point us in the right direction. New Mexico wasn't exactly around the corner, but it was better than wandering aimlessly. The trio packed up their supplies and hit the road early the next morning. The drive was long and tense, each mile bringing them closer to potentially greater risks. Along the way, Ethan practiced controlling his abilities, testing their limits in isolated areas. He learned he could generate bursts of energy strong enough to shatter concrete, but using too much left him drained and disoriented. It was clear he still had much to learn. When they finally arrived in New Mexico, Grace led them to a dusty diner on the outskirts of Albuquerque. Inside, the air smelled of grease and stale coffee. A few patrons sat nursing cups of tea or flipping through newspapers. Oblivious to the three strangers slipping into a booth near the back, Grace scanned the room until her gaze landed on a wiry man in his 50s sitting alone at the counter. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and his leather jacket bore patches from various motorcycle clubs. That's him, Grace whispered, nodding toward the man. Daniel Hughes, ex-historian turned conspiracy theorist. If anyone knows about the Awakened, it's him. They approached cautiously, Grace sliding onto the stool beside Daniel, while Ethan and Rachel hovered nearby. Mr. Hughes, she began, keeping her voice low. My name's Grace Miller. I was told you might be able to help us. Daniel glanced at her, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. Help you, with what? Grace hesitated, then decided to cut straight to the point. We're looking for the Awakened. People who've come into their powers recently. We think you know something about them. For a moment, Daniel simply stared, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he motioned for them to follow him. Outside, once they were away from prying ears, he lit a cigarette and took a long drag. You're playing a dangerous game, he said finally. The Veil isn't the only group interested in folks like you. He gestured toward Ethan. Some of these resistance cells, they're not exactly heroes. Some use their powers for selfish reasons, stealing, hurting others. Not everyone sees this awakening as a gift. Ethan frowned. What about the ones who want to help? The ones trying to protect people? Daniel shrugged. There are good ones out there, sure, but finding them won't be easy. Most operate in secret, moving constantly to avoid detection. If you're serious about joining forces, I can give you a location, but I'm warning you it's risky. Despite the warning, Ethan didn't hesitate. We'll take the risk. Daniel scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to Grace. Good luck, he muttered before walking away, leaving the trio to process what they'd just learned. The address led them to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. As they approached, Ethan felt a strange sensation, a tingling in his chest, like static electricity building up. He realized it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from inside the building. Someone or something was there. Grace knocked on the heavy metal door, and after a moment, it creaked open. A tall, muscular man with short cropped hair and piercing blue eyes greeted them. Who are you? He demanded, his tone wary but firm. My name's Ethan Carter, Ethan replied, stepping forward. We're here because we heard you might be able to help us. The man studied them for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. Inside the warehouse was bustling with activity. Dozens of people moved about, some practicing combat techniques, others tinkering with makeshift weapons or medical supplies. Ethan noticed that nearly everyone radiated the same kind of energy he felt within himself, fan aura of power waiting to be unleashed. The man introduced himself as Ryan Fletcher, the former soldier Grace had mentioned earlier. He explained that the Awakened had formed shortly after reports of unusual abilities began surfacing. Their mission was simple: protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and resist organizations like the Veil. We're not fighters by choice, Ryan admitted, but when people like us are hunted down and experimented on, we don't have much of a choice. Ethan listened intently, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. Maybe they weren't alone in this fight after all. But as Ryan spoke, Ethan also sensed tension simmering beneath the surface. Not everyone in the room trusted outsiders, and whispers of dissent rippled through the crowd. Later that night, as Ethan, Grace, and Rachel discussed their options, another member of the Awakened approached them. Her name was Claire Bennett, a former operative for the Veil who had recently defected. She looked tired, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail, but her eyes burned with determination. "I know why you're here," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "And I want to help." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Why should we trust you?" Claire hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive. "Because I stole this from Victor Kane himself. It contains information about the Veil's plans, their experiments, their targets, everything. If you want to stop them, you'll need this." Ethan took the flash drive, his mind racing. This could be the break they needed. But trusting Claire wouldn't be easy, not when betrayal lurked around every corner. As the days passed, tensions within the Awakened grew. Some members argued that working with outsiders was a mistake, while others believed unity was their only chance at survival. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to hone his abilities, pushing himself harder than ever before. He knew the battles ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood on the roof of the warehouse, gazing out at the desert landscape. Grace joined him, her arms crossed against the cool breeze. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, I don't think I'll ever be okay again. But I'm starting to understand something. This isn't just about me or even us. Whatever happens next, it's going to change everything, for better or worse." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll face it together." Behind them, the lights of the warehouse flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, danger was never far away. The days turned into weeks as Ethan, Grace, Rachel, and their new allies within the Awakened worked tirelessly to prepare for the battles ahead. The warehouse became a hub of activity, with people training, strategizing, and sharing information about the Veil's operations. Despite the growing sense of camaraderie, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Not everyone trusted Ethan and his group, especially since they had arrived so suddenly. Some members whispered that outsiders could be spies sent by Victor Kane to infiltrate their ranks. Ethan tried not to let the suspicion bother him, focusing instead on honing his abilities. Each day, he pushed himself harder, testing the limits of what he could do. He discovered he could generate energy shields strong enough to deflect bullets and even project bursts of force capable of knocking down walls. But using these powers came at a cost. Exhaustion followed every session, leaving him drained and irritable. Still, he refused to slow down. If they were going to stand a chance against the Veil, he needed to be ready. Grace, meanwhile, pored over the data Claire had provided on the flash drive. It was a treasure trove of information, detailed plans for experiments, lists of targets, and maps of facilities where captured individuals were being held. One document in particular caught her attention, a blueprint labeled Project Genesis. According to the notes, it involved extracting and weaponizing awakened abilities, creating an army of super soldiers, loyal only to Victor Kane. "This is bad," Grace said one evening, showing the blueprint to Ethan and Rachel. "If they succeed, we're looking at a global catastrophe." They won't just control awakened humans, they'll turn us into weapons. Rachel frowned, leaning closer to examine the document. Do you think they've already started? Grace hesitated before nodding. I think so. There are reports of disappearances all over the country, people with powers vanishing without a trace. I'm guessing they're being taken to places like this. She pointed to a location marked on the map, a remote facility in the Nevada desert. Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. Then we stop them. We hit them where it hurts. Ryan Fletcher, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. It's not that simple. These facilities are heavily guarded. Even with our combined strength, getting in and out alive won't be easy. Claire spoke up, her voice steady, but tinged with urgency. He's right. But if anyone can pull it off, it's us. We know how the Veil operates. We've seen their tactics firsthand. If we plan carefully, we might have a shot. The group spent hours discussing strategies, weighing risks, and assigning roles. Ethan would lead the assault team, using his powers to breach defenses and create diversions. Grace and Rachel would handle communications, coordinating movements, and gathering intel in real time. Ryan and Claire would oversee extraction, ensuring that anyone rescued from the facility made it out safely. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the best they could come up with under the circumstances. Before they could act, however, trouble found them first. Late one night, alarms blared throughout the warehouse, jolting everyone awake. Someone had breached the perimeter. Armed agents clad in black tactical gear stormed the building, firing tranquilizer darts and deploying smoke grenades. Chaos erupted as members of the Awakened scrambled to defend themselves, their powers flaring in flashes of light and bursts of energy. Ethan sprang into action, generating a protective barrier around Grace and Rachel. Stay close, he shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. Outside, vehicles roared to life, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Reinforcements were arriving, and fast. Ryan barked orders, rallying fighters to hold the line while others evacuated non-combatants. Claire darted between groups, relaying updates via radio. They're targeting the leaders, she yelled. We need to draw them away. Without hesitation, Ethan charged toward the main entrance, unleashing a shockwave that sent several attackers flying. His presence drew fire, giving others time to regroup and counterattack. Inside the warehouse, Grace and Rachel worked frantically to disable surveillance equipment and destroy sensitive documents, knowing they couldn't leave behind anything that might compromise their mission. As the battle raged on, Ethan noticed a figure standing near the edge of the fray, a man dressed in a sleek black suit, watching the chaos unfold with cold detachment. It was Victor Kane. Ethan's blood ran cold. How had Kane found them, and why was he here personally? Kane raised a hand, signaling for his men to stand down momentarily. Then, stepping forward, he addressed Ethan directly. You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Carter, he said, his tone calm but laced with menace. But running won't save you or your friends. Join me, and I'll ensure your safety. Resist, and I'll make sure you regret it. Ethan glared at him, his fists trembling with barely contained rage. Go to hell. Kane smirked, unfazed. Suit yourself. With a snap of his fingers, the attack resumed, more ferocious than before. Ethan fought valiantly, but the sheer number of enemies overwhelmed him. Just as he began to falter, Ryan appeared at his side, wielding a makeshift energy weapon cobbled together from scavenged parts. Fall back, Ryan shouted. We can't win this fight, not here. Reluctantly, Ethan obeyed, retreating alongside the others as the Awakened launched a coordinated counter-offensive. Explosions rocked the warehouse, sending debris flying in every direction. Through the chaos, Ethan caught glimpses of familiar faces, some fighting fiercely, others falling to the ground, unconscious, or worse. The sight fueled his determination, but also deepened his resolve to end this once and for all. By the time dawn broke, The warehouse lay in ruins. Many of the awakened had escaped, scattering into the desert to avoid capture. Those who remained gathered in a hidden bunker miles away, tending to the wounded and mourning the lost. Ethan sat silently in a corner, his head bowed, replaying the events of the night over and over in his mind. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. "We'll rebuild," she said, softly, "and we'll strike back." "This isn't over." Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Could they really take down someone like Victor Kane, or were they simply delaying the inevitable? Later that day, Claire approached Ethan, her expression grim. "There's something you need to see," she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was footage captured during the raid, a video message from Kane himself. In it, he taunted Ethan, promising retribution and revealing a chilling detail. Project Genesis was already underway. Dozens of awakened individuals were being experimented on, their powers harvested and amplified beyond natural limits. "We don't have much time," Claire warned. "If we wait too long, it'll be too late." Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him, the lives depending on him, the responsibility thrust upon him, the fear of failure. But then he remembered Ryan's words, "We fight because we have no other choice." And for the first time, Ethan truly understood what that meant. Standing up, he addressed the group. "We're hitting Nevada," he declared, his voice firm despite the exhaustion etched on his face. "We're going after Kane's facility. If we can shut down Project Genesis, we might still have a chance." No one argued. They knew the risks, but they also knew there was no turning back. Together, they began preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives, a mission that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their humanity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Ethan stood outside the bunker, gazing at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the vast expanse of space, the avians had sealed humanity's potential millennia ago. Now, the seal was broken, and the dormant war gods within were awakening. Whether that power would bring salvation or destruction depended entirely on what happened next, and Ethan Carter was ready to find out. The journey to Nevada was long and tense, filled with whispered conversations, careful planning, and restless nights. Ethan, Grace, Rachel, Ryan, and Claire traveled in a convoy of battered trucks and vans, their vehicles loaded with supplies and makeshift weapons. The desert stretched endlessly around them, barren and unforgiving under the scorching sun. It was a landscape that mirrored the weight pressing on their shoulders, a harsh reminder of the stakes they faced. Inside one of the trucks, Ethan sat quietly, staring out at the endless horizon. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He replayed Kane's taunting message over and over in his head, each word fueling his anger, but also deepening his resolve. They couldn't afford to fail, not when so many lives depended on them. Yet doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. What if they weren't strong enough? What if Victor Kane was always one step ahead? Grace noticed his silence and reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You're thinking too much," she said softly. "We've got this far because we stuck together. That won't change now." Ethan managed a small smile, grateful for her reassurance. "I just keep wondering, am I ready for this? For all of it." "You don't have to be perfect," Grace replied. "None of us do. We just have to keep moving forward." Her words helped steady him, but the unease didn't fully dissipate. Across from them, Rachel fiddled with a map, marking potential routes and escape points. She glanced up occasionally, her expression guarded, yet determined. None of them had spoken much about the losses they'd suffered back at the warehouse, but the pain was there, lingering beneath the surface. As night fell, the group stopped to rest in a secluded canyon. Fires crackled softly as people gathered in small clusters, sharing food and stories to lift their spirits. Despite the camaraderie, an undercurrent of tension ran through the camp. Everyone knew the mission ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but no one voiced their fears aloud. Instead, they focused on preparation, sharpening tools, testing equipment, and practicing maneuvers. Claire moved among the groups, offering advice and answering questions. Though she had defected from the Veil, some still eyed her with suspicion. She ignored the glares, knowing trust had to be earned. When she approached Ethan later that evening, her tone was serious. "Kane will expect us to attack head-on," she said. "He'll have traps set, reinforcements ready. We need to be smarter than that." Ethan nodded. "What do you suggest?" "Hit them where they least expect it," Claire replied. "Use your powers to create chaos, while smaller teams infiltrate the facility. If we can disable their security systems, we might stand a chance." It was a risky plan, but it made sense. The group spent the next few hours refining it, assigning roles, and rehearsing every step. By the time dawn broke, they were as prepared as they could be. The facility loomed before them like a fortress carved into the rock, its walls gleaming under the midday sun. Surveillance drones patrolled the perimeter, and armed guards stood watch at every entrance. From a distance, Ethan and his team observed the layout through binoculars, noting guard patterns, camera placements, and possible weak points. "This is insane," Rachel muttered, lowering her binoculars. "There's no way we can get past all of that." "We don't need to get past all of it," Ryan said, pointing to a service tunnel marked on the map. "If we disable the main power grid, we can cut off their cameras and alarms. It'll give us a window to move in." "And how exactly do we disable the power?" Grace asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set. "That's my job." Before anyone could argue, he led a small team toward the designated spot, using bursts of energy to shield them from view. As they neared the fence line, Ethan raised his hands, channeling his strength into a concentrated blast that tore through the chain-link barrier. Alarms blared instantly, but it was too late. Their opening had been made. Inside the facility, chaos erupted as lights flickered and died. Guards scrambled to respond, their movements hindered by darkness. Meanwhile, Ethan's team split up, following the plan to the letter. Ryan and Claire led a group tasked with freeing prisoners, while Grace and Rachel worked to sabotage key systems. Ethan stayed behind to hold off reinforcements, his powers surging as he unleashed wave after wave of energy against incoming attackers. Despite the initial success, things quickly grew complicated. Reinforcements arrived faster than expected, forcing Ethan to push himself harder than ever before. Sweat poured down his face, and his muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to falter. Every second counted. Elsewhere, Ryan and Claire navigated narrow corridors, searching for holding cells. They found dozens of people trapped inside, their eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. Some were barely conscious, their bodies weakened by experiments. Others stared blankly, their minds fractured by trauma. Seeing them only fueled Ryan's determination. "We're getting you out," he promised, breaking locks with brute force. "Stay close, and follow me." But not everyone was willing or able to move. A young woman named Lisa collapsed as soon as she stepped free, her legs giving out beneath her. Claire knelt beside her, offering support. "We'll carry her," she said firmly. "No one gets left behind." Back at the control room, Grace and Rachel worked frantically to upload a virus designed to cripple the Veil's network. "Almost there," Grace muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Just as the program finished uploading, a squad of soldiers burst into the room, guns drawn. "Don't move," one of them barked. Rachel reacted instantly, grabbing a nearby chair and hurling it at the nearest soldier. The distraction gave Grace enough time to finish her task, triggering a cascade of system failures throughout the facility. Lights flickered wildly, and alarms wailed louder than ever. "Let's go," Grace shouted, grabbing Rachel's hand as they bolted for the exit. By the time everyone regrouped outside, the facility was in ruins. Explosions rocked the compound as overloaded systems triggered secondary blasts. Ethan stood at the edge of the chaos, his chest heaving as he watched the destruction unfold. For a moment, relief washed over him. They had done it. They had struck a blow against Victor Kane, but the victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, Kane's voice echoed over a loudspeaker, distorted but unmistakable. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "You've only delayed the inevitable. Humanity isn't ready for what's coming, but I am." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Ethan clenched his fists, his anger boiling. "Over? He's still out there," he growled. "And he's not done with us." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grim. "Then neither are we." As the group loaded the rescued prisoners onto the trucks and prepared to leave, Ethan took one last look at the burning facility. He thought about the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the battles yet to come. This fight wasn't just about stopping Victor Kane, it was about protecting humanity's future. And whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't stop fighting. Not until the war was won.